Welcome to Embrace the Spiritual Podcast. Join friends Michelle and Dawn as they share tips on how you too can open your heart, raise your vibration, and reclaim your sovereignty. Hear what they have experienced and overcome in their spiritual journeys while navigating this expansive spiritual multiverse. Discover how they transform their soul lessons from ordinary into extraordinary.
Follow, subscribe, and share Embrace the Spiritual Podcast on all streaming services, including YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Go to embracethespiritual.com for bonus content. To book a quantum energy healing session with Dawn, visit her website, alchemy-sacredsound.com. And to book a quantum energy healing session or learn Reiki or Tuning Forks, visit Michelle on her website at energeticembrace.com. Welcome back to this new episode where we are talking about knowing your limit. I had a fun little exercise last week where I got to exercise knowing my limits. Dawn and I were actually going to record an episode last Thursday, and I was working on presentations for an event that Ted and I were hosting for his business. And so I was putting together all the presentations that came from everybody in all different formats and making it consistent. And of course, that was my priority to get that done because the event was on Saturday. And I thought, I'm sure I could squeeze in a recording of an episode on, I think it was Thursday we were going to do it. And I just had to finally admit that if I did that recording, that basically meant I was going to stay up probably an hour and a half later that evening to get everything done. So all I was doing was adding something into my day. I couldn't really replace it. It wasn't a one-for-one changing of priorities. I was thinking if I do both, I'm just going to stay up later, and I'd already been staying up late. So Dawn and I giggled because, of course, she sent back, yay, you know your limits. And it was pretty funny because when I was in the working world, I was that perfectionistic high achiever. I got high volumes of work done, really well, but it comes at a cost because my body kind of took a shit kicking. My adrenal glands just went in the toilet, and that's your, stores when you need to kind of get that last minute stuff done. Well, I just emptied the tank, and then I was still trying to put my foot on the gas pedal. So knowing your limits, the reason why we wanted to talk about this with respect to embracing the spiritual and the podcast content that we put out is, many of our listeners, if you're working a traditional job or you're an entrepreneur, but you're working something and then having this spiritual aspect of yourself, it's hard to have a balance. And recognizing your limits in both aspects, whether it's on the spiritual side or what you're doing to generate income, knowing your limits is really a sign of self-love or an act of self-love and awareness and maturity. It's not a sign of weakness. And I think that's a challenge with that word limit, because limit by definition is basically saying there's kind of a stopping point. But we keep pushing ourselves past those stopping points, typically for other people, not because of something we want to do for ourselves. And I think therein lies a big part of the problem is we're pushing ourselves, we're sacrificing our own health, our happiness, because maybe you're doing it for work instead of saying, you know what? This job is really the work of 1.5 people. And yes, I'm doing it, but I do not have a healthy work-life balance. And I'm on the edge of burnout. And I think we don't talk about burnout and exhaustion enough. I would probably, not that I like labeling, but I experienced probably chronic exhaustion for years. Like, it took a long time after I was done working to try to rebuild those energy stores. And it's not easy. So if you can listen to this, and we'll give you some tips on maybe how to shift that limits to make it a good word for you. It's a boundary. Let's face it, you're setting up a boundary of what you are able to accomplish or you are able to do in a healthy way, a successful way. Because let's face it, once we push past a certain point, if you're working, there could be errors in your work, or it's just not your best work. which ultimately reflects back on us, even though we were trying to do something good. And I think that's the big thing. It is not a sign of weakness. I see it as a place of empowerment. You're taking back your boundaries. And yes, many of us are doing things where other people are involved, but why should that person's expectations dictate you pushing your own boundaries to make somebody else happy? That's not healthy.
I love that you know your boundaries and it's about you being happy. So my youngest had a meltdown this week, and I knew she had reached her limits. And one friend that I help out, who's 92 years old, her son left suddenly because his friend had died and he went to Canada to help the family. And she was left without a dog walker. And she is 92 and she cannot walk that dog at 8 o'clock at night in the dark. So I had messaged my daughter and said, can you please walk her dog Sunday and Monday? Well, Monday rolled around and she had a crazy day. She had come for her car that she bought, did some fixing of it because the battery wasn't holding the charge, or it was, I don't know. It was confusing. I don't understand cars. She does. So she had come home, started on her homework for the automotive job that she's going to be working in a week. And I had got a text from my friend saying, I'm out to dinner. I will try to be home at 8. And so I just, relayed the message. And well, that started her, it was a tantrum. I understand, because in her tantrum, all this stuff that had been building up and building up and building up just came out. And I said, okay, so you failed your test 8 times, but it's still letting you take it. You agreed to walk her dog, not my responsibility. And my team was like, don't say yes, because normally I would have said yes, or like, she's going to miss the lesson in this and you are going to miss the lesson in this too. So she threw a fit. She's like, I'm going to go take a nap. I said, okay, that sounds perfect. And then I, text my husband. I'm like, our daughter had a meltdown. So he came in and he's like, we had a disagreement, because he's like, let's rescue her. And I'm like, no, this is not ours to do. And he's like, well, what would happen? So we were like playing back and forth scenario, but I'm like, I couldn't understand what I was feeling. And then I ended up getting a text about, you can walk the dog now, which was like 8:10, and 8 o'clock was supposed to be the time. So she woke up, she left, and we were both kind of like, I was like, good, she's doing what she needs to do. And my husband was like, I just don't care anymore. So I'm like, all right, that's how it goes. So maybe I'll tell him not to listen to this, because he's like, I don't remember what we were talking about earlier. And I said, I just don't care anymore. Like, because the next day he was like, what were we arguing about? He's like, I don't even remember. So I'll have to timestamp this and be like, don't listen to the first 10 minutes. And she went on a walk. The dog, was perfect for her. And then she found a toad, and she loves amphibians. She loves frogs. She loves toads. She brought it home with her. I'm like, you know what? I felt like there was something that she needed to do on this walk, and obviously she needed to get this toad. So the toad came home. She felt great because she took a nap. She went back and took that test another 12 times, and on the 20th time, she finally passed. And she felt good about it, and it was a crisis averted. And how many times do we do this to ourselves? We create a situation. Instead of like stepping away, taking time for us, we create a thing that is bigger than it should be. She should have gotten out all the stresses that she had felt earlier in the day, from her friend running a red light with her car to failing this test and knowing, okay, if I keep repeating this pattern, I'm going to keep getting the same result. So what can I do to change the pattern so I will not fail this test over and over again? So she finally decided, I'm going to take notes. You have to realize that in your situation, what is not honoring yourself for your limit. And it can be simple as taking notes so you don't repeat this pattern. Or, as Michelle realized, I need to cut down on the amount of things that I'm doing because I put too much on my plate. And we do this all the time. I had a job at a grocery store where we would do the tags and the signs for the store when the sale came. And Sunday was the busiest day. It was the most stressful day. And we only had so many hours because they're like, well, you can get this all done in this amount of time. Well, some of us were A workers, some of them were B workers, and some of them, their definition of work was not thorough. And something came up and the price was wrong. Our company had to give a refund, and it could be 10 times the amount of the money that it was off, up to $10. And it always reflected badly upon our department. Even though we are human, we are only doing what we're supposed to do. and not everybody is an A worker. So what can you do? You can only do your best and hope that whoever's aisle it was, they get called up to the customer service and not you. And I realized that this is not the way any company should be run. Things need to change. There had to be a better system, because a lot of times we have these plastic bags and we're putting the tags in, but they rip, they get holes, and people would pick them up and be like, well, I want this. And, every Sunday we'd get 2 or 3 phone calls, come up to the customer service. And I realized I just have to step away. This is not a job that I want anymore. It is not helping my family. I'm never home for the weekends because my kids were little. It was mandatory weekends. And if you wanted to go off on weekends, you got a crappy job and crappier shift. So that was the way that they paid you back. So I'm like, this is not how we should do business, and this is not honoring me. So I ended up leaving and telling my boss, like, I know all the stuff you said about me, because I felt like I needed to let her know, since she had been talking about my back when I had taken over her maternity leave. And she came back and never thanked me. And during her time, we were audited, and I got 100% on her audit. But my name didn't go on the audit because I was the manager in charge of the department. It was her. So know your limits. Know when things are just not working out for you, whether it be a job, school, things on your plate because, of life. Are you overextending? I see so many people who think if I pack my day full of stuff, I'm like a super person. But is it really honoring who you are? So you do 10 things a day. Are you getting peace of mind? Are you on a adrenaline rush, and are your adrenals so wiped out that you are like aging quicker than you're supposed to? Start asking these questions on knowing yourself. And when you're in a close family dynamic, know when your family members are reaching their limits. And I didn't know that, my daughter had reached hers, but it was evident when she had that tantrum, and that's fine. And she immediately apologized, which I love her because she can flip it around and be like, oops, I was just dumping on you. I really didn't mean everything I said. So know your limits.
I love that example of you at work with the limits, because my daughter is like that. And I'm super proud of her that she might go into a work environment, like it at first. And this isn't, I want to qualify this. This isn't just, the younger generation giving up because things get hard. She knows what her kind of boundaries are when it starts affecting her mental health. So she recognizes, if I keep doing this, yes, it's a paycheck, and they always loved her at any work that she has been at because she's got really strong work ethic. So it's not that she just goes and she's scrolling on her phone. She, gives it her all, but she's learned that this is not good for my mental health. So she knows that kind of limit and boundary, and she won't stay at the job. And early on, I know that she kind of had a tough time because she felt like she was a quitter. And I think lots of us feel like that. If we honor ourselves, we're quitting on somebody else. But if we don't honor ourselves, we're quitting on ourselves. So when we can honor ourselves and know what our limits are, and anytime she's left a job, she's been so graceful about it. They've been really understanding that, as a young adult, that she's able to recognize those things about herself. And there's lots of us that are 40 plus years old that haven't learned that yet. And we stick it out. We become lifers at our jobs because that was what deemed us successful. If you could stick it out for 10, 15, 20 plus years, that basically spoke to your character. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary actually defines limits as being aware of what you're good at doing and what you're not good at doing. So to Dawn's point of us overextending, lots of times we think we have to take things on ourselves. And yes, even though we may have been able to do it faster, maybe a bit better than somebody else, by giving somebody else a chance to do it, it's expanding their skills and abilities, and it's taken something off your plate. So I think that's really important. And you know what? If you don't like the word limit, I was thinking about this. I thought, what's a better word? Because limit has that negative connotation. And I thought capacity. What's our capacity? If you think of a gas tank, so in Canada, we're leaders. American, they're in gallons, but if you had a 60-liter tank or a 15-gallon tank, you can only put that much gas in. You keep filling it up, it's just going to spill out onto the ground. Well, that's what happens with us. When we run over capacity by either doing too many things in a day, so that we're staying up later, we're sacrificing our sleep. I certainly did that last week, and I'll speak about this later on, but it was interesting for me, kind of that negative cycle that I've had since college. I would wait till the last minute. I know there's people listening have last minute itis because you start it later and you work your butt off and it comes out great. So it's not like it was something that came out bad and you learn a lesson from that. If anything, it's kind of a negative reinforcement, right? So even this past week, I had lots of information where I was doing some of it along the way, but then I kind of, slacked off, I guess. Maybe I was just giving myself my own work-life balance, which is good because I think that's a challenge when we work from home, isn't it? That the computer's there all day, not like you're leaving an office and your computer behind. So it's always accessible and we're always working. So then we feel like if we're not doing that, we're being lazy. Well, we're not. But anyways, so I like capacity. Obviously, we're calling this knowing your limits because that's more recognizable. But when you're recognizing your limits or your capacity, that includes your physical, your emotional, as I was talking about with my daughter, your personal limits, which are shaped by your own personality, life experiences, knowledge, skills. And when you're pushed beyond them, what happens? In the case of Dawn's daughter, it affected her emotionally because you just get to that, that saying, the end of your rope, which, we got to be careful, conscious languaging, because you're not really at the end of your rope, but that kind of tells you that, you think you've done everything you can and you just emotionally break down. So that's usually what happens. We recognize our physical things that start happening or the effect on our emotions and our mental health. So when you are maybe pushing those limits or your capacity, then pay attention to those because your body will always tell you what's going on. You have to be willing to listen.
That is so true. So one of the indicators that a lot of us overlook is when we reach our full capacity, we become a little more negative. And that's how I know, like, my daughter has reached her, this is more than enough that I can handle, and I'm done. So she actually worked at Tim Hortons for, I think, 6 months during the lockdown when New York State could open up, and she was homeschooling, so she could work a looser shift, and she had gotten permission from the high school. And there she worked with some great people that she absolutely loved. And then she worked with some people she was just like, I don't even know why you're here. And it got to the point where it was dragging on her so much. Her behavior at home and her, she's usually happy, go lucky, but it was like she was a different person. Her languaging was not what it usually is. It was negative in her body. She just gets like this, like, I am so defeated. And I said, maybe it's time for a change. And it was true. The woman who was giving her a hard time, and you always have these people wherever you go, whether it be a customer, a coworker, that they know how to manipulate you and just make your life harder. So you're doing a job, and Tim Hortons is a fast-paced job. Well, she would do register and she would also get the stuff ready. That's how fast we are, like go-getters. Like, we work quickly. She would be like get people through, and they loved her working. So they would try to have her work as much as she could. But this woman would just be like, I don't care. They need me so much that they're not going to fire me, which is not a great way to be working a job, in my opinion, because if you're not giving it your best, we're doing an energy exchange. I'm going to give you stuff, and I always think about it when I give my client her food. I'm giving it with love to her, and I hope that she feels the love in her heart that I made her food with, because I know it's an energy exchange. But do you want to be going to somebody who is like, I don't like you, or calls you names under her breath when you're being served? I don't want to be that way. And my daughter knew it. She's like, I don't like how she talks about customers. I'm not that type of person. And again, it's knowing when you've had enough. And she started looking for another job, and she ended up, becoming a barista at another place. And she was such a good worker, they actually had to tell her to slow down. They're like, we're not used to efficient people, so you can't, like, they actually took her off register because she was just too darn good. Which I think is a great way to be, but I can understand because every business is different. And she loved it, but again, it wasn't feeding her soul. So she decided, when she found out that the company was going to be taking a year off, or not a year, at the end of the year, they're going to be closing from January 1st to the 31st to do a remodeling, and they weren't going to pay anybody. They're like, you can go on unemployment, which it does take a little bit, and we'll see you in February. Well, she's like, you know what? I don't like this. So she knew, again, this is not right. I need to make a change. That's when she decided to go back to school and become a auto tech. So there are so many ways that we are shown, like, are you going to put up with what people want from you and let them dictate your life? Or are you going to say, no, I'm going to make a change for the better of me, and take back my life and reclaim my sovereignty? Because this is all about doing what is best for us. And, I understand why the owner of the company was doing that, but she didn't want to, be manipulated and go on unemployment for I don't even know if you could get it for a month. I know that there is a time frame where they're like, well, are you sure you're not going to get your job back? Because I've been on unemployment. It's like a 2-week period where you sometimes don't get paid. She's so young. She's 19. And to know, like, this is not going to work for me. But some of us who are a little bit older, we're just, a little bit too stubborn in listening and being like, I was at my one job for 8 years before I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And then my other job that I went to, unfortunately, I realized that there were too many cooks in the pot trying to dictate how this company should be run, because it was so new that I needed to step away. Especially, I had been doing like kitchen prep and then lunch service, and then on my off hours I would go and roast coffee, and then I was also doing like homemade teas, and I had been doing it the same way for over a year. And then like year 2 was like, oh, we need to look at everything you're doing. It's like, well, why didn't you do this before? Because I had been asking for feedback and, oh yeah, it tastes good. It tastes good. It tastes good. And then it was like, there had been a shift with the staff, and it was like, well, let's start looking at all these pieces and see like what needs to be micromanaged. And I said, I can't do this. And when my husband got his job back, because that was why I was working full time, I'm like, as soon as you get for your first paycheck, I'm leaving. And sure enough, he got his first paycheck, and I'm like, yeah, I give my 2 weeks notice. Thank you, but no, thank you. I don't like being micromanaged. I don't like to be felt like I am under a microscope at all times. And it wasn't even just like the owners, like the male owner was okay. The woman owner was not okay with it. And then it was like, I had 3 or 4 other people who were looking at, well, what about you? What about you? I had this other coworker that I thought we worked great with, and they're like, she's too slow. I'm like, I don't have a problem with her. That, again, is somebody's perspective because they decided that they didn't want her working for the company, I feel. And how many times are we put through these obstacles because somebody else thinks you're obsolete, or I can make you work harder if I put pressure on? And how are you going to put up with this when that happens? Are you going to leave? Are you going to say, I think you're wrong? I think it works out great. And again, who is making the decisions? Like, is there a time limit? Yeah, we were a cafe style, come up to the counter, you order your food, and then you go check out. But we always got people within 5 to 7 minutes. I don't think that's a bad time frame. And sometimes even less if we were really on a roll. And, we always have to refill. We always pre-prepped. And, we always had those odd days when it wouldn't go through properly because, well, there was a tour bus of people who came through and they didn't ask the restaurant, oh, hey, we're going to have lunch here. Could you make sure that you have enough food on hand to feed an extra 40 people along with your regular? And I just, don't understand why people always look at the worst days and say, why didn't we do better? It's like, we did the best that we could in what information we were given at the time. And, hiccups happen, and that's okay. It's a learning curve, and we always got through it, and nobody went hungry. Maybe they were a little miffed that they had to wait, but why did we become such an instantaneous society, from phones to information to service? Because it's not better. Fast food is not food, it is junk. And we're more of a farm to table sort of restaurant that I work. And that's how life should be. We should not be looking for these fast fixes. It takes how long for plants to grow? If you have the perfect conditions. And if you have a dry season, well, you have to supplement. Why are we acting like everything has to get done so quickly? It doesn't. And I think it's a mindset. The beliefs that we're brought up with, how we're raised, what kind of conditions with that. I would like to step away from what we've been programmed to do and start living to, I'm going to live under my capacity so I can live a happier life.
I also realized that, you know what? My capacity and my current age, time of life is definitely different than it was 15, 20 years ago. So for me, kind of that perfectionism was really hard to unwind because, well, I used to be able to do this. And you know what? I can't anymore. Or I don't have the capacity, because I don't like saying can't. I don't have the same capacity that I used to. So I'm going to be gentle with myself and adjust what I actually can get done. Here's some things that I would encourage you to look at when you're trying to work with your limits, capacity. Do some self-reflection, because most times we drive ourselves further than maybe what's expected of us, especially at, a traditional job perspective where you're reporting to someone else. We have a fear of failure or fear of harsh judgment from others. We have harsh self-judgment. And a lot of times we're putting that onto ourselves, and it's actually not coming from an external perspective. So having that self-awareness and self-reflection can help recognize those differences between maybe that toxic perfectionism and be healthy, striving, and do what you can in your day. Because if you're working at a job and you've got a job description, the job description should define the work it takes to do within the normal workday. It shouldn't define, here, if you work 1.5 times your normal hours, you can get this job done. Well, no, that's not the way it is. But a lot of times we do more than what's expected, and we actually impose these extra expectations that are unnecessary. Even if you want to reframe those expectations, redefine what constitutes good enough. Because I think no different than limit has a negative connotation, so does good enough. But shouldn't we all just do, like Dawn said, the best we can in the moment with the tools we have? That's good enough. And why is that bad? It's not. Perfection is truly unattainable. And if anybody thinks they are perfection, they are totally working in their egos, and they're just measuring themselves against a certain expectation, and it's unrealistic. So shift to more of focusing on your progress rather than getting it perfect or pushing to a deadline that's maybe not realistic. And speaking of deadlines, I actually had this in one of my roles, and my boss at the time, love her to death. She's super hard worker like we were. And this year-long process that I was ultimately responsible for executing, to people who aren't doing the work, seemed like, why does it take that long? And it was a really tough expectation to manage, because the work behind the scenes actually took a lot longer than people would think it would take. So if you're in that kind of situation, what we did is we essentially mapped out the entire process. And I encourage, if you're going to do something like this, whether it's a specific process you have in your role that you want to do this, start with the end in mind. What's your deliverable? And work backwards. Don't start from start to finish because you miss things. So if you start with the end in mind, okay, well, what do I have to do right before that to make sure that that gets done? And then what do I need to do right before that thing? And so you start backing it up and attach timelines to it. Okay, so realistically, if I have all the information, it will take, and no other distractions, like this is perfect world, it might take me 3 days, but it could take up to 5 days. So put 5 days. Like, don't shortchange yourself. And maybe it takes 2 weeks for you to receive all that information to do that step. So then you have to back that up 2 weeks, right? For people to, so you can start to see when you put realistic timelines on what it takes to do work, it doesn't matter if you're working for an organization, if you're working for yourself, because I think sometimes when we work for ourselves, it doesn't take that long because we don't put the same kind of thought process into figuring out how long it actually takes to do the work. And we were able to identify, this is why we start this process in February to get approved in December. And once we laid it all out, we said we can modify any part of this, take any part of it out. And as soon as you see it laid out, it's like, no, that's what we need to do. And so I think doing that for ourselves recognizes what it actually takes to get the work done. Because I think in putting these unrealistic expectations on ourselves, we think it's taking shorter than what it actually does. And then we judge ourselves. So that's not healthy. And identify those triggers. Dawn's work example was a perfect demonstration of this, that if you're aware of the situations and people that trigger, these certain things in you, and developing healthy coping strategies just isn't going to work to manage those triggers, then maybe it's not the right environment for you. Practice that self-compassion. I think this is so important. We've talked about self-love so much across many of our episodes. Typically, we treat others with more kindness, if a deadline was missed or they were sick and couldn't get something done, but we don't treat ourselves with that same kindness and understanding. So don't criticize yourself. And again, set realistic goals, achievable goals, and embrace adaptability and flexibility so that you can navigate those unexpected setbacks or challenges. Maybe your pet gets sick, your kid gets sick. Maybe you have an aging parent that lives with you that has medical needs that you need to take a step back from whatever work you're doing. So if you only build in your schedule the exact time it takes to do something, and you don't have the flexibility for other things for yourself, if you happen to feel under the weather, then you're setting yourself up for heartache, right? Like, it's hard to feel like you're ever going to come out ahead. So developing those things, I think, is really key. Your self-awareness, reframing the expectations. Embrace your imperfections. Nobody's perfect. Hey, I might do this the long way, but I still get it done. And you might be able to do it in, 25% less time, but give me the time to do it. Just because someone else can do it a little bit quicker doesn't mean my timeline's wrong. And manage those triggers where you can, self-compassion, setting realistic goals, develop that flexibility, and seek support from others. So often we won't speak up for ourselves in those situations, saying, I can't get this done, I need help. Can we change a deadline? Can I get maybe somebody else to come in and help work on this with me? It's okay to ask for help.
As you're talking, they're like, follow your intuition. Your intuition always knows 100 steps before you do what you need. I get a lot of phone calls, and I know, like, we could have a great conversation, and then I'll hang up and I'll be like, I don't know if this is going to work out. Because my intuition is like, the energy was great there, but the person on the other end of the phone doesn't know what they want. And it's so true. So while we're talking about knowing your capacity, a lot of these people don't know what their capacity is. They don't know what they want. They haven't given it any thought. They haven't thought about, what do I need? What are the family needs? What are whatever I need the caregiver for needs? And which is kind of sad, because I get a phone call, and you should know, because I know the jobs can be super easy or they can be super complicated. But if you are reaching out to do something, and I just was thinking about, like, how does this relate to other life? When you make that phone call for something, are you getting your point across? Do you really know what you want or need, or what you are asking to be fulfilled? And intuition comes into play. Like, I know we talk about thinking. I'm not a thinker. I feel out the situation, because there was this one job that I got a call on, and my team was like, say no. And I was like, what? And they're like, say no. And I said no. And a friend of mine took it, and she's like, we worked one day, and the family, I can't remember if he ended up going to the hospital or if the family decided to do something else. She's like, you were right. And it was kind of a drive for me. So I was like, yeah, like, glad I called that one. And it's looking at those decisions, like, how did I know? Like, I technically didn't know, but I knew that was going to happen. But I I couldn't have told you what I was feeling. I just felt like it's not going to work out. And my friend was kind of like disappointed because she had made a lot of, especially with what we do, we have multiple people that we help out, and you shift a lot of stuff. Like, okay, I'm going to, since it's an overnight job, I'll get this taken care of during the day and I'll sleep, this time. And then to have made all those changes and then to only work one time and then not go back is like, that's a lot of like energetic shifting that you did. And, I'm glad that she went, but I knew that it was just not for me. So use your intuition when making decisions, because it will talk to you and it might not make sense at the time. Or sometimes I'll just sit there and quiet my mind and think about, is this job going to happen? Because I keep sometimes I'll talk to people 3 or 4 times. The job just does not happen at all, even though they're like, I really want you to work for me. And it's like, I don't know if it is, because like we can talk all this time, but you have to commit. And that's what a lot of times, I know a lot of people are, work for real estate who listen to us, who have these jobs, where they're like headhunted out. I also feel like there's a time limit of, how many times they're going to answer the phone and talk to you and just be like, this job is not going to work out. I'm going to stop answering the phone. Because I've done that too, where some people are so, I don't know what I want, but I'm a perfectionist that I will plow myself under in my perfectionism and then end up, having to have an A or B alternative, which was not ideal for me. So listen to your intuition. It will lead you in the right direction. And it's a little like, well, Dawn, how can I use this? And I can't even tell you. It's like this feeling that you get. And a lot of times when I get these feelings, I'll say, what are you trying to tell me? And it's not words that I hear. Sometimes I see pictures or I am shown feelings. So listen to your intuition. It will never do you wrong. In the Raymond Grace book, I know he had this great saying where he asks his higher self to let him know when something is not going to work out. So I guess in the way that I use my intuition, I've kind of told myself, if the job is not going to work out, let me know. And I just know, like, I don't feel that it's going to happen. Like, I just can't put myself there. And it's interesting because I'll actually see timelines where I'm supposed to work the job. But as the conversations keep going on and on and on, I'm like, those timelines start disappearing and disappearing and disappearing. And it's like, I don't even see a thread anymore. I'm like, I think you need to go somebody else or another direction. And a lot of times those people end up putting their parents in nursing homes. So it's kind of like you feel the undercurrent of they want you to be a miracle worker, even though they're going to do choice C, and they made up their mind is choice C way before you started the conversation. So use your intuition when you are in these situations for people overstepping your boundaries. Is this honoring me? Am I being honored by this person pushing what they want from me? And if you're not on a time schedule and you can take time out of your what you're working on, like my daughter did, and she took a nap and she still failed the test 12 more times. Well, technically 11 more times, but on that 20th time, she finally passed. Take time for yourself. Figure it out. We put these perfectionist, like unachievable time limits on ourselves. Technically, time is a man-made construct, and who knows when it started, but in the really old days, sun came up, we did work. When it went down, we stopped doing work and we did other things by the bonfire or by candlelight. Times are changing. Honor what is right for you and know what is going to fill your capacity over with too much. And it'll never be something that you can't handle.
That's great insight. Thank you. And a couple final things that I wanted to share around, getting to that point of self-reflection, because I think it's not something that a lot of people either do at all or maybe not on a regular basis. But in getting to that point of becoming self-aware, I think there's a few things that you can do to help get to that point, which in turn helps you understand your limits and boundaries. Mindfulness meditations. These don't have to be long, but it's really about you being still, removing the external noise, whatever's around you. And it's really about connecting in with your own thoughts, your emotions, your physical sensations. Basically what Dawn was talking about with her intuition. This is really helping you get still so that you can tune into that intuition. And it helps you ultimately will be able to identify and recognize those patterns and triggers, because if you can take that stillness and do a body scan, see where it's coming in your body of, whatever stressors you're feeling for the day, because that's really self-awareness, is you're recognizing how the outside world is impacting you on the physical and emotional level. So if you like journaling, certainly journaling is a great way. If you need to talk to a confidant to talk about your needs and desires, if you're not comfortable doing that, that's where journaling is a great tool, because what do you really need and desire? I think so often we don't verbalize or articulate what we value and what we need and what we desire, because once we can understand that on a deeper level, then we're going to have healthy relationships, whether it's personal, work relationships, and it helps to regulate our emotions as well. If we can get to that mindfulness practice, it's also going to help you on a daily basis manage your impulsive or reactive behaviors that can sometimes compromise those boundaries that you're setting for yourself. And that self-reflection is going to help you understand how your emotions and thoughts influence your behavior, helps you to make more intentional decisions about setting and maintaining your boundaries. That's really what it's all about. Knowing your limits, what's your capacity, what boundaries need to be set up so that you can maintain a healthy capacity and put yourself first. Follow, subscribe, and share Embrace the Spiritual podcast on all streaming services, including YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Go to embracethespiritual.com for bonus content. To book a quantum energy healing session with Dawn, visit her website, alchemy-sacredsound.com. And to book a quantum energy healing session or learn Reiki or Tuning Forks, visit Michelle on her website at energetisembrace.com.
Infinite love and gratitude. Thank you for joining us.